Welcome to Akhand Vidyashram, the first institute of impeccable wisdom. Let's discuss about NAD, NADH, FAD, FADH2, and water and cleavage, etc. And enhanced oxygen energy, and also the fatty acid beta oxidation to produce more ATP. Let's start with Kapil Vriksh. Entire knowledge of atom, elements, molecules, compounds came from the universe and primarily from methane and oxygen, and carbon dioxide and water came down, and then life started in churning ocean or Sagar Manthan or Samudra Manthan, and everything started from thereafter. And from mineral kingdom we have come to the plant kingdom, and then to animal kingdom, and finally to the human beings. Now come to the question of the first thing which was produced for consumption was carbohydrate, or primarily glucose only, and that is from carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, or hydrated carbon. And some of the glucose is used for cellular respiration, means glucose plus oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. This cycle goes on, and some of the glucose is accumulated or converted into starch. Glucose plus glucose is maltose. Maltose and maltose could be starch, a chain reaction which is stored in the seeds to be used at a later date. And third thing, glucose can also be used to make lipids by reducing oxygen from same carbohydrate glucose. Carbon and hydrogen is maintained, oxygen is reduced to 2, and then lipid is used later to produce more ATP, 2.25 times more than the glucose and proteins. And also the formation of proteins and lipids and other things come from glucose only. The primary carbon, hydrogen and oxygen is maintained, then nitrogen for proteins, then carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen plus phosphate for the energy molecule. That's how we are proceeding now, step by step. Now come to the question. Cellular respiration, as I told you, is for ATP production. How glucose is used, how the oxygen is used into cell, and finally we get ATP. And as far as aerobic process is concerned, 61.803% of oxygen used for aerobic process to produce pyruvic acid. When after that it is not oxygen oriented, that becomes without oxygen, it is anaerobic, and that can go on 38.16%, and it produces lactic acid. Pyruvic acid, lactic acid, ATP. This is a process which I want everyone to understand is only according to Divyang, nothing other than that. Once we understand that, everything will fall into space. All the confusion, misconception will be completely dissolved once for all. Now comes the question of energy molecules. As I told you, modern science talks of only three concepts: solid, liquid and gas, as you can see in this particular picture. But on the right side I have shown energy molecule, which is fourth in concept. When energy is reduced, it is converted into liquid and solid. When energy is increased, it is converted into Vayu and Akash. So Sanatana Dharma are Bharat as such follows the 5 states of the matter, not the 3 states which modern science talks. That is also according to Divyang. 3 and 5 is this. So these are various 5 elements which I have already explained as a catalyst for ionic exchange. That again I have made it clear. As in this particular picture, it is water which is important, and without water nothing can go. So Amrit is water, and leave it at that. And all the ion exchanges convert into only water element. Without water it does not work. And same water, when energy is reduced, can become liquid or solid ice. When energy is increased, can become Vayu, hydrogen and oxygen, and energy of the universal consciousness. Leave it at that. Now there comes to question of 3 basic molecules which we know very well. Primarily is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which also adenosine diphosphate and also monophosphate. I have explained this concept very clearly. This is the most important energy molecules of life. It is used for sodium potassium pump and all the function within the cells. Whether it's skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, or the neurons as such. Their excitable muscles use only ATP and ADP and AMP as such, but at the same time I also explained adenine is one, but there are 5 different nucleotides and all of them can produce this, but all of them finally get converted into ATP only. Now come to the question of NAD structure. This is something which goes to the next stage of molecules. You can see in this structure very clearly you have a nicotinides on top and also it is down and ribose 5-phosphate. These two 5-phosphates, adenine and nucleotide as such is a NAD structure. And now to make it very clear why nicotinic acid is a very good receptor. It functions very well in muscle levels. There are nicotine receptors which function very well with this, and they are the one who will produce extra energy to give the action which you are doing it. Sensory component also needs it and motor component more. Along with acetylcholine, other things, this goes on. Once you understand, then whole concept will become very, very clear. Now the counter question of NAD and NADH as such. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, it's a 2, as I told you, the 2 nucleotides. What is a nucleoside? One is this, and of course there are 2 protons, there are 2 protons together, and one has got NAD, another one is NADH. You can see the left with only one H on the second on the nucleotide this particular niacinamide. On the right side niacinamide you can see 2H, not 1, and that's why it got NADH, only 1H, not 2H, but in NAD has 1, in the other one is 2. So this structure is very clear how they can, but finally they work together as a unit, as ATP to ADP to AMP, say NAD to NAD, there are exchanges. Hydrolysis, reductase takes very clear in that part. Once you understand that, then things will be very clear how they are going to function. Now comes to the FAD. But FAD is a flavin adenine dinucleotide. There are 2. One is flavin, another adenine, and there are 2 parts, and then the structures you can see. But in this particular case, it is H2. You can see right on the left side is FAD. Right on the 2 part and the flavin part, you can see 2 parts where the hydrogen is going to be added. Is very clear, and the right one you can see when it is attached as such, right side. And to NH, same thing, and NH on the right side is very clear. Once that is done, this is again to the nitrogen on both the sides, not otherwise. Once this is understood, then you can know there is exchange in that same, say, reductase and hydrolysis, which work together as a complementary, as a more or less like a building stock. And once that is understood, they can do very well in understanding beta oxidation process as such which goes on. Now come to the question of flavin reductase. You can see on one, in that FAD to this particular combination is NADH plus H to leave to 2 to H2. So in other words, FAD to FADH2, 2 things come from NADH plus another hydrogen which can convert to this, and 2 go to that, and how the reduction process takes place. Once this chemistry is understood, only then you know how they are going to function very well. Similarly, you can reduce a minus water, and what will be the structure, and reduce, otherwise put oxygen, reduce oxygen, what is the structure. And once this structure is very clear, then you will know how these energies actually behave and produce energy within the body to make us function very well. And let me tell you one thing very clearly, person who wants to be intelligent, super and otherwise should have this NAD, NADH, FAD, FADH2 along with ATP, abundance in things with acetylcholine, so that these processes can go on, give you the extra energy and go on. And I think that makes very clear. And similarly, I have gone on record to say it is Antaratma, indwelling soul, which is helium 4, which is also energy matter, very powerful, like neon and argon as such. Once these processes go, only that person can be very energetic, very powerful, very intelligent and very intuitive, can do very well with the universal consciousness, otherwise it is not at all possible. Now come to the question of fatty acids. I have already talked about it, how carbohydrate or glucose is converted into fatty acid, but in the fatty acid it is the amount of oxygen which is reduced to only 2. Remaining carbon and hydrogen in saturated remain the same of C1 and H2. In unsaturated there is little difference in H part. It is not exactly double, little less, maybe 1 or 2. But oxygen remains same, O2, in all the things, and primarily is because this oxygen is reduced, so that we are going to put more oxygen into that to produce more ATP, which happens in cardiac muscles. Fatty acid can produce 2.25 times more ATP than glucose and proteins. 1 gram of glucose and 1 gram of protein can produce 4 kilocalories, but 1 gram of fatty acid can produce 9 kilocalories, and that is because of oxygen process only. Now come to the question of how fatty acids are produced in the plants. It's again the 10-stage process which I have talked about it, and that goes on very well. But in the right side I have said it is the carbohydrate or glucose which converts to lipid by reducing oxygen for that. Why? So that we can put oxygen to produce more ATP in beta oxidation. That is the process where NAD, FAD, NADH, FADH2, water and conversion takes place in beta oxidation, and that is what the whole objective is all about. Now there comes the question of beta oxidation fatty acids. Now you see the fatty acid on top, you have two combinations, saturated and unsaturated. Among the saturated you have the three, lauric acid, mystic, palmitic and stearic acid. Then unsaturated part you have monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. Monounsaturated you have oleic acid, this is omega 9. Then polysaturated has omega 6 and omega 3, and that is linoleic acid, GLA, GLA2, etc. etc. Once this picture is clear, you know very well from which source you get more beta oxidation, more ATP as such. One or two examples I would like to show in this particular process. But as I told you, it is 2.25 times more than what we get from glucose and proteins. Now come to the question of beta oxidation. As I told you, there are 4 levels of things which are very important. First is oxidation as first process, then hydration, water, then again oxidation, and then thyrolysis or conversion by and large. And this is where NAD, NADH and FAD, FADH come to play a very role in mitochondria. Now let's make it clear, it is mitochondria. Membrane as well as matrix play important role to understand concept, and that is what the picture I have shown in thumbnail also. Now looking at this picture, as I told you, there are 10 stages of oxidation process from fatty acid, and NAD to NADH is the oxidation process 1, then second is hydration, and then third is oxidation 2 with again NAD to NADH, and then comes the thyrolysis are the process, and finally you get acetylcholine again, fatty acetylcholine again to acetylcholine. This is the whole process which goes on. Right side you can see the lauric acid is carbon 12, hydrogen 24, but oxygen only 2. Mystic acid 14, carbon, hydrogen 28, oxygen 2. Palmitic acid 16, carbon and 32 oxygen and 2 oxygen only, hydrogen 32. Stearic acid carbon 18, H36, O2. Acrylic acid 20, hydrogen 40 and O2. So you can see carbon 12, 14, 16, N18. These are the 5 things come in the particular stage. Then come to linoleic acid as such, and then oleic acid, such unsaturated part, and goes. But you can see O is only 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. That's it. Now come to the question of fatty acid. As I told you in the very beginning, there are two concepts. Fatty acid oxidation pathway, there are two concepts. One is in the mitochondria membrane as such, and second thing in the matrix. What I am talking about, the both put together from one stage to the other stage, it goes through the process of taking. You can read it leisurely as such. There is no need for me to talk about it in general, because people by and large may or may not be much interested, but the people who are generally interested step by step can see it leisurely and understand concept and how things have worked out one by one. Now the come to the question of beta oxidation on palmitic acid. As I told you, the glucose can produce 32 ATP in continuous process on every level. But as far as palm acid is concerned, it can produce 128 ATP. Stearic acid can produce maybe 108, and the other things are there, many examples. Almost all fatty acids give different things, but more or less at the 100 plus level only. And once these steps are very clear, then you have the Krebs cycle, then 8, and second thing, how Krebs cycle works on 8 times, then how 7 rounds of beta oxidation take place otherwise, how they are divided, how they are added step by step, you can see very clearly in this particular part, and how finally 128 ATP comes up. Now coming to the last stage in this particular thing, let me sum it up again. Entire chemistry in Rig Veda is talking about atom, element, molecules and compounds which come from the universal consciousness to as such on the earth. And like Mercury, Venus, Earth and Mars, all of them had 97% carbon dioxide to start with. In Mercury, it got converted into 42% oxygen because it's very close to the sun. Direct energy, water could have got converted into that, is 42%. But on the earth, because the plant is converted to 21% oxygen, not 42. In Venus and Mars, it still continues to be around 97 only. And it is a plant which produce carbohydrates used to produce oxygen. Again, it is the water which is converted into oxygen, where a carbon dioxide is converted into glucose. But glucose further get converted to fatty acid when oxygen is removed and put together. This cycle goes on, and once that cycle goes on, things are very clear that this is how the nature is going to work. Now from that point of view, we come to the stage different things would work, and in the process, talking of different nucleic acid energy molecules, I make it very clear. Most powerful energy matter, most powerful is hydrogen, and that is sun, and hydrogen bombs can do wonderfully, very well, very powerful. Second thing in the line is helium, which is antaratma, which can help produce the kind of energy which is required to make every human being perfect, intelligent, intuitive, otherwise. Second thing. Then come to the question of energy level. It is the lithium, which is next to hydrogen in the level on that side, is more powerful, which is used in batteries and many other things, but is very, very powerful. Then right side, it slowly goes down. Then oxygen comes to play a very important role, and that is what is talked about in Rig Veda. It's Agni Bhuta which is most important, and this is oxygen which is there, Ashtabhujadhari, 8 electrons which work very well. Then comes the argon. But then come to the question of other side is the sodium. Is more electrogenic. It is used in the extracellular product to make things to move from outside into the cell for action. So it's more electron. Then inside the cell is potassium, and then also the calcium. Once this is understood, I think we are very clear the role of these 22 electrons as the first one play a very important role as such, and out of which the standing one are very clear. It is hydrogen, helium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, sodium, chloride, potassium, chloride, calcium, and then 14 others. Once that is understood, these are energies when they get into the water, This water ionic energy is more important than pure salt as such. Sodium chloride is not very efficient, but sodium chloride with water is more important. Same with the potassium chloride as such is not powerful, but potassium chloride with water is important. Same thing with calcium, same thing with everything. So remaining, keeping that in mind, one thing which stands out is water content is 61.803%, and that is more dynamic, more energetic as thing. That's why we are seeing everywhere hydrolysis are reductase. You reduce water and you produce water to bring the changes which are required. Once that whole process, you will know how Rigved and Upanishads have helped me to understand science better, what scientists have lost, have got from there, and both put together as a spiritual science, I think is a much better way of understanding concept, the way nature had designed. And having understood that step by step, I think that knowledge is concerned, no student will ever make a mistake, and they could be a walking talking encyclopedia. And unless until we come to that stage of functioning, we will never be able to understand divine chemistry, because at the end the human body is nothing but a perfect pharmaceutical company where perfect blissful things can be produced within the human body, provided we are pure vegetarian, no smoking, no drinking, nothing at all. Now as far as niacinamide is concerned, or NAD is concerned, is much more in smoking, but it can produce too much. As a result, you can land up with a cancer as such. Similarly, everything in that. So I would not suggest that people should take non-vegetarian, should take alcohol, smoking, drugs and other things, because they spoil the system. I said, living with a pure vegetarian diet, other thing which is good for self, you can be perfectly healthy, wealthy, wise and human being. That's the message which I am giving to the world as such. And once that is understood, I think we'll be perfectly good human being, can do wonders for everything with intelligence, with a perfect education, perfect research, perfect publication, where there will not be even single confusion as such. That process is done by Akhand Vidyashram and Shibhushan Sharma as such. And let us start something so that everyone has a perfect, nobody can be saying that knowledge was not available. As on today, I make it very clear. People go for graduation, post-graduation research, but finally when come to the functional part, none of the education is useful, because they have to be trained with the kind of work which need to be done. We need to train them so that people can be perfectly healthy, wealthy, wise and live without disease and work on preventive medicine. That is my objective. No person should ever fall sick, come what may be. Having said that, I think it's enough for the day. Thank you very much.